Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us in this morning's session. We have a roundtable presentation for you now. The subject of the presentation is investment opportunities in plant-based meat, hype or hope. The presenters today are Julian Ting. Julian is Vice President at Blackpine, and Nick Cooney, Managing Partner at Lever VC. Julian, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. My name is Julian Ting, as Alex mentioned, and I'm VP at Blackpine, which is a single-family office based out of Hong Kong. I'm here today with Nick, who is Managing Partner of Lever VC. Lever VC is a venture capital firm focused entirely on the alternative protein space and is sponsored by Blackpine. Before I introduce Nick, I'd like to share a few words about Blackpine. Blackpine is a thematic private markets investor and focuses on sectors that we believe are at an inflection point primed to benefit from long-term secular shifts. 6 years ago, Blackpine made its first alternative proteins investment. Since then, we've continued to deploy capital into the space and refine our investment thesis. In 2018, our firm decided to establish an alternative protein strategy by way of a VC firm to be led by Nick. Nick has spent over 15 years in the alternative proteins industry and is regarded as a global thought leader and has even written a book on the sector. Prior to Lever VC, Nick founded and led New Crop Capital, a US-based alternative proteins-focused VC firm, where he established an enviable track record of 8.6 times TVPI and 86% IRR across 22 investments, including Beyond Meat, Memphis Meats, Geltor, and Mosa Meat. Nick also co-founded the Good Food Institute, which is the world's largest NGO working to advance the alternative proteins industry. Without further ado, I'll give you Nick Cooney.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen here and go right into a presentation. So my goal here is to basically take about 25-30 minutes to give an overview of the alternative protein sector, what's going on, why it's going on, the investment opportunities, the sector trends there, and so on. And then we'll have some time for a question and answer afterwards. So just go ahead and share my screen here so we can get going. Right, I think it should be displaying correctly at this point. So as Julian noted, we work together along with our colleague Lawrence and several other colleagues with Lever VC. So just to give you a sense of where I and we are coming from, Lever VC is a sector specialist alternative protein fund. We invest in plant-based meat and dairy companies and high-tech alternative protein companies throughout Asia, Western Europe, the US, and beyond, a global portfolio of early stage companies in this space. So I'm going to dive right in and start talking about the opportunity in alternative protein. So back in the summer of 2011, a fellow named Ethan Brown came to my house. So Ethan was an entrepreneur. He had recently started a company called Savage River in the US that was producing a plant-based chicken product, like you see here, it's on the left. He came to my house because I'd been working in the sector for a number of years, and he wanted me to try the product in hopes that I would recommend it to retail buyers and customers in my networks. I liked Ethan, I liked the product, so we stayed in touch. A few years later in 2015, I launched a family office investment vehicle, as Julia noted, making investments entirely in this alternative protein space. And Ethan's was one of the first companies we invested in. Now, you probably haven't heard of this company, but that's because they changed their name to one that's a bit more recognizable, and that is Beyond Meat. And here is Ethan and his team celebrating last year when that company had their historic IPO. Beyond Meat's IPO certainly made headlines globally and brought, for the first time to many people's attention, this plant-based meat sector and the alternative protein sector more generally. But this is actually a sector that's been growing steadily and quickly year over year for a number of years. So if we zoom out and take a macro level picture here, total animal protein production globally has been doubling approximately every 30 years as a result of increases in population as well as GDP. And projections are that will happen again in this coming 30-year period. And that means roughly 1 trillion USD in new value being unlocked in this sector. But the question is, where is all that protein going to come from? So projections from research agencies and others are that by mid-century, about 1/3 of total animal protein production or total protein production and consumption is going to be coming from so-called alternative proteins. The sector is already growing very quickly. So if we look, for example, at a category like milk, fluid milk, in the West, both the US as well as Western European nations like the UK, France, Germany, and so on, 15 years ago, about 2% of the entire milk category was plant-based milk, things like soy milk, coconut milk, almond milk, and so on. Today, it's 13% in the US and 10 to 15% in most major nations around Western Europe. So we've seen plant-based fluid milk take a significant share of this market, and that share is continuing to grow year over year. On the plant-based meat side, we're now seeing that same trend as well. So it's been growing anywhere from 20% year over year in the US to 14% year over year in China, 12% year over year in Europe, and so on. And projections from leading investment banks like UBS, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, and others are that by the end of this decade, plant-based meat alone will represent a $40 billion to $140 billion market. As this has been happening, that global revenue for plant-based meat and dairy has continued to climb. So it's approaching 40 billion at this point, and again, growing very significantly year over year. We're also seeing high year over year climbs in the plant-based protein, the functional plant-based protein category, things like powdered proteins that might go into foods, beverages, or other applications. So what exactly is alternative protein? So certainly one of the examples we've been chatting about just now are things like plant-based meat and eggs and dairy. So these are companies that take regular plant-based ingredients, whether it's proteins or plant-based fats or carbohydrates or so on, and they combine them in a certain way to replicate the taste and texture and function and nutrition of conventional meat and egg and dairy products. So these are things like your plant-based meats, your plant-based dairy products, and so on. The second major category within alternative protein has been called cultivated or cell-based meat, egg, and dairy products. So these are companies that are producing literally the real thing. At a molecular level, this is real chicken protein, beef, pork protein, dairy protein, et cetera. However, these companies have removed live animals from the supply chain. They're producing this real animal protein using more modern technology, things like cell cultivation or fermentation or other approaches, which again gets you real, molecularly identical animal protein without the need for live animals. So what are the benefits of these things? Well, there's a number. So first, taste. When these products are made correctly, and some companies do better jobs and some don't do as good a job, but when it's done well, these products taste really delicious and also have a unique taste that a number of consumers like. There was a survey that came out just a few weeks ago from UBS of several thousand consumers globally, and it found that about 30% of people who had tasted a plant-based meat or dairy product felt they tasted as good or better than the conventional version. So taste is one benefit for good brands. Health is another major benefit. So these products, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy products, they have a lot less fat. They have no cholesterol whatsoever in them. They typically have more fiber, and in most cases, they're packed with protein as well. So a healthier substitute for a meat product that a consumer might otherwise be eating. They're also much more sustainable. So they take far less land, far less water, far less other natural resources being needed. And lastly, they're much higher in food safety. So because they don't come from live animals, you have no risk of E. coli, salmonella, or any other sort of animal-borne disease. In terms of cultivated meat, many of the same benefits. From a health perspective, while this is real animal protein, because you're building it from the cellular level, you can customize it. So you could, for example, add more nutrients, reduce the amount of fat or saturated fat, reduce the amount of cholesterol. You have that ability to tweak and optimize that nutritional profile. It's also much more sustainable. Again, far less land, water, energy, and other natural resources. Same food safety benefits. It's produced in a controlled production facility. And because there are no live animals, and no animal waste consequently. That eliminates things like salmonella, like E. coli, and other foodborne illness, as well as animal-borne illness. On a similar note, because it's produced in these sterile factory settings, you eliminate animal-borne diseases, things like swine flu, bird flu, COVID, and so on. Just one quick note on the market for cultivated meat and dairy products. We know that there's a large, as noted, a large existing and growing market for plant-based meat and dairy. When it comes to these higher tech, cultivated or cell-based meat or dairy products, these are essentially not on the market yet. We're just starting to see the first 1 or 2 products enter the market, but they won't, as a sector, won't really enter the market until probably 2022 or 2023. And because many of these products are still under research and development and the price is still coming down, when they do enter the market, these initial products will probably be higher priced, higher value meat, seafood, and dairy products. I want to take a moment just to share a little more about what exactly cell-cultivated meat is, how companies can produce real animal protein without having live animals in the supply chain. There's 2 main ways that this is done. So the first is, we could call it cell replication. And this is what many companies in this sector, the majority, are doing. And so what's done here is you take things like muscle, fat, blood, or tissue cells from an animal. You isolate those cells and create a stable cell line that can keep reproducing itself. So you take those, say, muscle cells, you put them in a container, you feed the cells sugars, nutrients, which cause the cells to replicate, and then replicate again and again and again and again. You organize those cells on a scaffold to provide that 3D shape and texture you would get with a piece of meat. To do this on a large scale, you would do it inside a bioreactor, a similar piece of machinery you might use to produce beer or many other products that are produced currently, both in the food and non-food space. And what you get out the other end is this 3D structured, textured piece of real meat with real meat muscle tissue, real meat connective tissue, fat, animal protein, animal fat, and so on. So that's one of the main methods. The second main method is fermentation. And this is actually very similar to what is done at a beer brewery. So you start with a similar step. So you would take cells from an animal. You then look at those cells very closely and you isolate the specific protein you want to produce. So let's say it's a certain chicken protein or pork protein. You isolate that protein. And what you do is you take a microorganism, yeast is a common host used here, and you essentially teach that yeast to express the chicken protein or pork protein or whatever you like when it's fed sugars and nutrients. So this is modifying the expression system within the yeast so that rather than expressing what it naturally would express, it expresses real chicken protein or real pork protein or so on instead. And then you go through a similar process as I was just describing. You use a fermentation tank similar to a beer brewery. You take this modified yeast, you feed it your sugars and other nutrients, and out the other end comes this powder or chunk animal protein that again is molecularly the real thing, identical to the conventional version. Whether you're talking about chicken, pork, seafood, dairy proteins, egg proteins, or so on. So these are the 2 main methods that companies around the world are now using to produce real animal protein without the need for live animals in the ongoing supply chain. So what about consumers? Why is it that this sector is growing? Why are consumers interested in picking up these products and eating them? Well, there's a few main motivations. So if we look at the typical customer profile for someone buying and eating alternative proteins, far and away, the typical consumer is somebody who consumes meat, consumes dairy, but they've begun adding these plant-based proteins, these alternative proteins into their diet in order to benefit their health. They know that eating less animal protein, more plant-based proteins is healthier, and so that's why they're adding them into their diet. Their secondary motivations are the other things you see here. So taste is a secondary motivation. As noted earlier, a meaningful portion of the public actually finds some of these products to taste better than the conventional meat or dairy version. And then you also have some consumers motivated by ethical concerns. So maybe they want to eat more sustainably, or they care about animal welfare in these supply chains. Now, while all ages and all demographic groups are picking up and eating alternative protein products, if we look at it from an age perspective, the consumer groups that are most interested in these products and eating them most often are younger consumers. And so if you start from the oldest age cohort, go a step younger and a step younger, with each step younger that you go, the amount of interest and the level of consumption of alternative protein products increases and increases. So for example, if we look at one of the younger generations, the millennial generation, a recent survey found that in millennials polled, about 50% of them said they've eaten a plant-based meat product in the previous month. And about 3/4 of them said they consumed a plant-based dairy product in the most recent month. So certainly this is a sign of where the sector, where the food industry and the protein industry is heading when you see younger consumers in particular so enthusiastic about these products. Let's talk for a few minutes about sector growth and about who's investing in the space and helping it to grow. So this chart here shows where total sales are now in the world's largest alternative protein markets and where they're projected to be 10 years from now: China, Europe, and in the US. So what we can see is each of these is sizable markets. And by the way, as you can see, the numbers for this particular chart are in billions of renminbi. So you can see where these sales figures are now and where they're growing. As noted earlier, they're all growing very quickly year over year. In China, plant-based meat's been growing about 14% year over year. In Europe, that figure has been around 12%. In the US, 20%. And all three regions are projected to see, as you can see here, very significant continued growth, continued annual growth over the next decade and beyond. Because consumers are increasingly interested in this space, we see an increasing amount of investors also interested in this space. In fact, in just the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen over $4 billion invested in alternative protein startups. And this is coming from hundreds of investors across Asia, Europe, the US, Latin America, and beyond. This includes major leading funds, so funds like Horizons Ventures in Hong Kong, Kleiner Perkins in the US, Temasek Holdings in Singapore, UBS, and many others. And while most of these investments are in companies that are producing alternative protein products, whether that's plant-based meat and dairy products or the higher tech cell-cultivated or fermented meat or dairy products, there's also other investment opportunities around the sector as well. So for example, there's companies that are working on developing equipment that's used in the sector, developing novel proteins, companies working from the ingredient input side, the ingredients that go into the sector and help it succeed, companies working on distribution, processing, or other areas. So there's actually a fairly wide set of companies feeding into the sector, and therefore a lot of and broader set of investment opportunities in this space. Another thing driving the increased investor interest is the increasing pace of exits, successful exits in the space. We've seen many of the world's largest food brands like Unilever, Nestle, Danone, General Mills, and many others acquiring alternative protein companies. There's been over a dozen very, very strong exits in the space in the past few years. So as noted, Beyond Meat's IPO certainly made the greatest number of news headlines, both in the US, where Beyond Meat is based, but of course globally as well. And Beyond Meat currently has a market cap of around $6 billion. But again, there's been many, many other exits in the space. The typical route to exit has been via acquisition, and these successful exits have ranged anywhere from 100 million USD to 12.5 billion USD in terminal value upon exit. In addition to startups being launched, growing, and successfully exiting, we're also seeing some of the world's, in fact, several of the world's largest meat companies getting into the sector as well, both through investments in funds and direct deals, as well as through acquiring and launching their own plant-based meat and alternative protein products. So for example, WH Group in Smithfield noted, "We're thrilled to announce the launch of our new product portfolio. We've been entering the alternative protein space and have taken our time to get it right." JBS, based in Brazil, the world's single largest meat company, noted, "We're looking at opportunities. Our new plant-based vegetarian burger has the same flavor and texture of real meat." And Tyson, the world's second largest meat company, which has launched several of its own lines of plant-based meat products, has noted that today's consumers are seeking more protein options. So we are creating new products for the growing number of people open to plant-based protein. So when you have both successful startups and also many of the world's largest traditional conventional meat producers all saying that plant-based is an important part of the future and putting their money and their time behind it, it's pretty clear that this is indeed a significant part of the future of animal protein. So I now want to take a little time to look at China's alternative protein sector specifically. It's obviously it's close to home, and there's a lot of very exciting developments going on in China right now in this sector. So first thing to note is there's actually very broad consumer interest in this space in China. So if we look at surveys done in China by several parties like Mintel and independent researchers and others, and compare that to similar surveys done in Europe or the US or Australia, we actually see Chinese consumers speaking to and suggesting that they have the greatest amount of interest in the space relative consumers in those other geographies. So for example, 87% of Chinese consumers say they've tried plant-based meat products. 62%, nearly 2 out of every 3, say they're very or extremely likely to buy plant-based meat. And quite perhaps surprisingly, the public views, the public in China, Chinese consumers, views meat substitutes as healthier than real meat. In fact, 71% of associations that people have with these plant-based meat substitutes are healthy, that these are healthy products, which is a significantly higher percentage than when we look at things like pork, red meats, and even chicken. So a lot of consumer interest, and that's reflected in the increasing size and the annual growth of the sector. So the market is currently around 1 billion USD, close to 7 billion renminbi, and it's been growing, as noted, about 14% year over year. And projections from research agencies and banks are that that growth will continue to grow, in fact, growing even more quickly, getting up to anywhere from 15 to 25% in annual growth rate in the years ahead. If we take a moment to survey the total current alternative protein landscape in China and the market opportunity there for alternative protein. So as noted, roughly 7 billion in sales renminbi in 2019 in the sector, and growing 14% per year for the previous few years, which makes China tied with the US as the world's largest market for plant-based meat products. When it comes to plant-based dairy, China has by far the world's largest market. So it's about 120 billion renminbi or 17 billion USD in annual sales as of 2018. Far outstripping the US and Western Europe, which have roughly 4 to 5 or 5.5 billion USD markets for plant-based dairy products. And of course, China is also the world's largest consumer market for protein generally, both by volume and value, and will account for about 35% of the global protein market within the next 5 years, which means huge total addressable market for companies in the plant-based meat and plant-based dairy protein sector. In the past year and a half, food leaders in China have really begun embracing alternative protein. So all of the companies, you see logos from here, whether it's Burger King, Pizza Hut, KFC, Nestle, Starbucks, Metro, Cargill, others, have gotten involved in this sector over the past 12 to 18 months, whether that's launching their own products for companies like Cargill, for example, stocking retail plant-based meat products in the case of retailers like Metro or Aldi or City Super, or adding plant-based meat options to the menu at places like Burger King, Starbucks, KFC, and so on. All of these companies have seen the growth and interest in the sector from consumers, have seen the increasing quality of product from some companies in the space, and have gotten in on this trend. So just a few examples of that. This year in China, we saw KFC trial plant-based chicken nuggets and burgers, which they've now rolled out to hundreds of locations around China. And Starbucks partnered with companies like Beyond Meat and Hong Kong-based Omnipork to launch these plant-based meat products, as well as plant-based dairy products at all locations they have around China. Packaged goods companies are doing similar. A very popular ready-to-eat noodle brand called Ramen Talk partnered with a plant-based meat startup called Vesta to launch a plant-based ramen product. One of the very famous snack companies, Baijiu, launched plant-based meat dumplings, snacks, and other plant-based meat products. Even meat producers themselves are getting in on the action within China. So KFC has tested several different types of plant-based chicken nuggets in its stores, including, and they're currently selling plant-based chicken from major animal protein company Cargill. We've seen one of the largest, most prominent ham companies in China, Jinjia Ham, launch their own line of plant-based meat burgers and other plant-based protein products. Retailers are doing the same. As noted a few moments ago, retailers including Metro, Aldi, Olay, City Super, City Shop, and others are now stocking for the first time plant-based meat products, as are popular online retailers like Freshema and others. E-commerce generally has also been an important avenue for sales for companies in this space. So we've seen Tmall very actively promoting the space and putting out detailed white papers about the growing interest in plant-based meat and plant-based dairy products from consumers. In fact, on the plant-based beverages side, there's been so much interest, Tmall has actually even taken action to form what they're calling the Plant-Based Drinks Alliance to grow that sector. And we've also seen Alibaba get involved, working with some certain plant-based meat companies, including having their product design team, the product design incubator, I should say, work with some of the more traditional vegetarian meat brands to innovate and develop more modern, consumer-friendly plant-based meat products like you see here in the photo. As a result of all this and the increasing consumer attention, there's also been a lot of media attention within mainland China, as well as within Hong Kong, to the sector. One important note, obviously this is quite important in mainland China, is the government support. And there is actually very strong government support for the sector. So the government has expressed this support in many ways. So national legislators and chairpeople have publicly expressed their support. The government has been drafting industry-friendly regulations for plant-based meat, with similar regulations under development for cultivated meat. We've seen government grants to fund research around both plant-based meat and cultivated meat go to universities. And just a few months ago, the government announced that one of the areas within food and agriculture that they're now focused on soliciting foreign investment into is foreign direct investment into plant-based meat specifically. Just examples of a few quotes from officials there. Plant-based meat is an iconic future food product that will create an enormous market in China. The development and implementation of plant-based meat in China is not only a market opportunity, but also an effective way to improve the food structure of Chinese residents and solve environmental and social problems. These are leading national representatives, national legislators, chairperson of the Chinese Institute of Food Science and Technology. So a lot of interest and support from the government for a few reasons: to have China continue to be a leader in key technology areas, to ensure a diverse protein supply and stable protein supply, an abundant protein supply, and to continue to improve the health of the public, because these products are, again, have some nice health advantages. China is also quite an interesting market when it comes to alternative protein, a market that is very different from the markets in Europe and the US in certain ways. In some ways very similar, but in some ways notably different. So the one way that it's perhaps most notably different is you have this in China, a very large incumbent traditional so-called vegetarian meat market. Products that probably most of you are familiar with, Buddhist-run companies, vegetarian meat products that have been around for many decades, where the product, the taste, the texture, the marketing has not really changed in quite a while, and they don't really replicate the actual taste and texture and flavor of meat. So this is the established industry, and most of the sales in the category right now come from these sort of products. It's also a very disaggregated market. So the three largest brands in mainland China in this category combined have just 56 million USD in sales, or at least did as of a few years ago. So that's less than 10% of market share from the three leading brands. So the fact that we have these somewhat stale incumbents, many of which have sort of outdated technology as well as outdated marketing, and no big market winners or leaders at this point, means there is this huge potential for disruption. And it's the market is really open to market leaders. And we've started to see these challengers emerge in China. So these are just a few examples of companies that have launched in the past 18 months or so, different sorts of plant-based meat snack products, packaged products, mooncakes. Hong Kong-based Omniport has been expanding into China in a very successful way over the past year. This year has also seen real traction within China, not just for some of the domestic brands, but also some imported brands. So most notably on the meat side, Beyond Meat and Hong Kong-based Omnipork. So Beyond Meat this year entered both online and physical retailers like Freshem and Metro. Omnipork launched its official store on Tmall. It entered several restaurant chains like Wagas and Taco Bell. And Starbucks China, as noted, launched both Omnipork and Beyond Meat products nationwide. In terms of the total landscape of alternative protein companies within China, including both mainland China and Hong Kong, there's about 75 plant-based and cell-cultivated meat and dairy brands that we at Lever VC are currently tracking. And that's excluding the massive number of plant-based fluid milk companies like soy milk companies, of which, of course, there's very many. So even leaving that large category to the side, if we just look at plant-based meats, other plant-based dairy categories like plant-based yogurt and so on, as well as cell-cultivated meat and related, large number of deals, an increasing number of deals. We're seeing practically a new company come online every week or every 2 weeks within China. So I want to give, before I wrap up, I want to give just a few examples of companies in this space, starting with companies in China, in the Greater China region, and then moving from there into a few more general examples, just to give a taste of what companies are out there, what they're doing, and what's made them successful so far. I'm going to draw these from Lever VC's portfolio as nice example companies. So Avant is one. So Avant is a company that's based in Hong Kong, based out of the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And they're the first company in the Greater China region producing cell-cultivated meat. So Avant has decided to focus on marine protein. So what they're doing is they're using this cell cultivation technology to produce two types of products. So one is real fish meat, and you can see a prototype product there on the left. And so as described earlier, what they're using is they're producing real fish protein, molecularly identical to the real thing, fish muscle tissue, connective tissue, fat, and so on, and able to produce real structured fish products like fish cakes, fish fillets, and so on. They're also working on luxury seafood products. So not shown here would be products like a fish maw. This is something they debuted publicly last year, a pure, highly clean fish maw product developed via cell cultivation that they're going to be able to sell at a lower price point than market incumbents. Higher purity, higher customizability, much better for the environment, much cleaner for consumers, and some other benefits as well. And secondly, the second main category that they're able to address is producing whole pure marine protein powder using the same cell cultivation platform. So they're able to produce this marine protein that has marine collagen, as well as a number of other marine compounds that are very powerful and popular compounds and ingredients within sectors like the health and beauty sector, the medical sector, and the general cosmetic sector. And in fact, Avant is already able to produce these whole marine proteins at prices lower than market price points with higher customizability, higher purity, and so on. So this is an example, and there's a number of other companies globally in the sector that are using the cell cultivation approach to produce not just meat or dairy proteins, but also other functional proteins that have value not just in the food industry, but in these other sectors as well, including very high margin sectors. Another example, which also a company from Lever VC's portfolio, Marvelous Foods. So Marvelous Foods is the first plant-based coconut yogurt company in mainland China. Are based in Beijing and Shanghai. And they produce this really delicious coconut yogurt. Plant-based yogurt is a sector that's been really taking off for several years in the West, both Western Europe and North America, and now is really starting to grow in China as well. As this general yogurt category grows, and as of course there's strong consumer familiarity with plant-based milks like soy milk, we're starting to see now a number of plant-based yogurt companies emerge in China, and in some cases get mainstream retail placement at conventional supermarkets, convenience stores, and so on. Maybe one last example before we wrap up and turn it over to questions would be Hero Protein. So Hero Protein is a plant-based meat company producing things like chicken and pork. It was put together by both a domestic Chinese team with input from leading food scientists from the West, folks who work with brands like Gardein, Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, Morningstar, and other sector leaders in the plant-based meat sector in North America. So they're doing chicken products, beef products that work across a wide suite of applications. So these are just a few examples of course, the hundreds, thousands of companies out there working on the meat side, the dairy side, on the plant-based side, the cell cultivation side. For Lever VC, we track the space globally. And we currently have over 1,300 companies in this sector that we're tracking. And those numbers are increasing quite quickly. So hundreds of those companies have launched just within the past 12 months. And we're seeing more new companies enter the space every week. So that's, I'll just skip ahead through these last few examples to save time for any questions and answers or so on. But certainly anyone that, if you want to learn a bit more about the alternative protein space generally, or just learn a little more about what Lever VC is doing in the sector and the opportunities that exist, whether that's for entrepreneurship, for investments, or other opportunities, you can reach out to Julian and I. You can, our phone numbers and emails are here, and we're also online at www.levervc.com. So maybe I'll pause there and pull down the screen share and turn it over to questions. So
thank you.
Perhaps back to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the details. So we've got a couple of questions which have come in. So the first one we have here. So you invest into only companies in Asia, but you shed light only on the Chinese market. Can you clarify, please?
We invest in companies globally. So we, of our current portfolio, we have about half of our deals are in North America, and the other half are split between Asia and Europe. So we have companies in mainland China and Hong Kong and Singapore, but also in the UK and France and the US and so on. So we are investing globally. For this presentation, I focused a bit more on, I added that section on the China market because obviously it's the largest market, dominant market, close to Hong Kong. And so figured some of that additional context about what's going on in China might be of interest. We're seeing similar trends certainly in other regions. So we're seeing that same strong growth in Western Europe and the US. Some of those market dynamics are a little bit different, but certainly we're seeing in all three of these markets this fast growth, increasing number of deal flow and companies entering the space, and increasing interest from investors, food companies, and so on. But that's the reason that I focused on China specifically in the course of this presentation. But yeah, we are indeed looking and investing globally in this space.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another question come in. Just before addressing that, if anybody else would like to add any comments, or if they have any questions for either Nick or Julian, please do fill out the question on the questions tab or in the chat. If you raise your hand as well, we'll see if we can bring you in on audio and video and have a discussion. So the second question that I've got that's come in, can investors invest with you directly into the deal or only into the fund?
Both indeed. So many of our investors in our fund have invested with us both because of my partner Lawrence and I's track record investing in the space. As Julie noted at the start of the call, we've been investing in the space for 5 years across, between the two of us, over 50 deals at this point, with a very strong track record of returns in terms of multiple and IRR. So certainly investors in the fund are investing partly for that reason, but for many of them, they also want to do direct deals. So we're very LP friendly in that regard. We have strong co-investment rights, a lot of direct deal opportunities. There have been numerous occasions where LPs in the fund have invested directly alongside us at the same time as we're making initial investments in these companies. And certainly also situations where our LPs have also done follow-on funding into companies that the fund is invested in. So yes, for LPs in the fund, there is that ability not just to have that indirect exposure through the fund to the global alternative protein space, but also be able to pick and choose direct deals within the sector as well.
Great. And then, yep, so we got another one coming here from Peter Churchhouse. What stage in a company cycle do you typically invest in? Early stage or later stage?
For Lever VC, we're early stage investors. So we're typically doing our first check around the seed stage, pre-seed, seed, pre-series A. Our general portfolio construction strategy is we're doing 20 to 25 of these smaller ticket, earlier stage, roughly seed stage investments. Average ticket size for us for these rounds has been about $500,000 USD. And then we're going to narrow down to 6 to 8 core portfolio companies that we provide more significant follow-on funding into in Series A and Series B. Checks up to 3 or 4 million in total. As of course those companies grow and there's a real de-risking that happens with them.
Fantastic. And another question, don't you think investing in early stage is risky?
So certainly it depends on the sector that you're looking at. For us, for the companies that we're investing in, like let's take the plant-based meat and dairy companies we're investing in as an example. All of the companies that we're investing in this space are companies that already have a proven product market fit. So they've got products on shelves, in most cases at hundreds, if not 1,000 plus points of sale. They've got strong and growing early revenue. And so it's clear that customers like the product, customers are buying the product. It's selling well enough to not just stay on store shelves and in restaurant locations, but to be expanded to additional points of sale. And so for them, even though it is a seed round, they've proven that out, and the capital they're raising at this or in around the seed stage is to simply grow that, to scale the marketing, scale production, distribution, and so on. And so while it is early stage, these are companies that have that proven product market fit. So of course, early stage investments always have some risk. For companies we invest in on the higher tech side, certainly there's an increased level of risk because they're in the research and development stage. They still have ways to go to develop their IP, to bring the cost down, and so on. But on the other side of that coin, you have the fact that, of course, equity in these companies is cheapest at the early stage. So maybe to give a real life example or two from that, we for Lever VC, well, maybe I'll start with a past example. With my previous investments through a family office, I led a seed stage for a company called Memphis Meats. So certainly that increased level of risk there. And the same year participated in a seed stage for a company called Geltor. This is back in 2016. So certainly there was that level of risk there, but what does that turn into? So Memphis Meats, they raised their Series B this year, led by SoftBank, currently valued at $650 million US. Geltor completed a Series B this year as well, that currently valued at $300 million. And so the fact that we were able to get early equity stakes when the seed round, they were raising around 10 million USD. So we've seen these roughly 30x and 45x to 50x growth in value for these investments from these deals. That's the sort of financial payoff that we get for taking smart, measured risk, early stage risk. And again, these are smaller checks. Most of our capital that we deploy will be in those Series A and Series B rounds when that risk can come down even further.
It would be great to understand as well the kind of reception that you're getting from family offices. Julian, I understand you're representing a family office. Are you both seeing a lot of interest in the alternative protein space from family offices? How do you see that panning out over the next 6, 12, 18 months?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So absolutely, Alex, we're seeing a lot of interest from family offices. A lot of them have, as you know, family offices in Asia are a pretty sophisticated bunch. So this space has been on their radar. When we meet with them, they're already bought into the thesis. They're armed with really good questions. More than half of our funding has come from family offices in terms of our LP base, and we expect that. So just to give you some context, we did a first close earlier this year in June. The fundraise is for 50 million. We got halfway there, and we expect that family offices will continue to commit through final close. Yeah, but it's not just family offices. We're also seeing a lot of interest from strategic corporates. So, for example, big food groups in Asia and China, they are very keen on diversifying away from traditional animal protein towards plant-based meat, cultivated proteins, and so they see us as a conduit for, accessing deal flow, accessing market intelligence, etc.
Thanks, Julian. I suppose as well, this, these kind of investments could possibly fit within, an impact strategy or a sustainability strategy for a lot of the families. Do you see them mentioning that when you speak to them, or indeed other investors?
Yeah, definitely. Some of them are very interested in the impact angle. Although we don't brand ourselves as an impact fund, because that's not for everybody. The truth is that when it comes to, I guess, alternative proteins, there is very direct alignment between I guess doing well and doing good. So a company that makes more money, sells more plant-based burgers, will end up being worth more, and every plant-based burger consumes 85 to 90% less resources, whether that's water, whether that's greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So very direct correlation between fund returns as well as impact.
Good. I don't think we've got any additional questions which have come in from the live audience. For those individuals watching on demand, if you have any questions that you'd like to direct to Nick or Julian, either reach out to them on the platform, or Nick shared the email address earlier on, so please do email them. Julian, Nick, are there any final points that you'd like to add?
I think from my side, I appreciate you having us on, Alex, and appreciate those of you who have joined to learn a little more about the space. We're always happy to share more information about the sector in general, aside from, of course, what Lever VC is doing. So happy to be a resource for those who want to learn more. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I know a lot of the summit attendees are based in Hong Kong. I'm in Hong Kong, so if anyone wants to catch up and learn more and over a coffee or a drink, I'm very happy to do that. We're set up to be extremely LP friendly. We like to engage with like-minded family offices that are enthusiastic about the space. So very happy to share knowledge and deal flow for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back at 2 p.m. for the next session. See you later.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.